Hey gamers, Treantmonk here. So usually when I do my guides or I do these videos, I'm talking about character building. But one of the most common questions I get when I do those kind of things is, so once I've built this character, how do I use it effectively? And so today what I want to start talking about is tactics. How do we play a wizard effectively? And we're going to be doing videos in the next 3 weeks where we're going to talk about tactics for wizards at 3 different stages. Today we're going to talk about levels 1 through 4. Next week we'll talk about levels 5 through 10. And then the following week we will talk about levels 11 and higher. Now, levels 1 through 4, this is often the point where wizards are kind of considered weak because they don't have a good armor class, they don't have a lot of hit points, they don't have a lot of spells, and cantrips don't do a lot of damage. So, what good are wizards? Well, I'll show you today. Welcome to Treantmonk's Temple. So first let's talk about first level. Right at first level, the first thing we need to do is we need to select our spells. So what spells I will usually select at first level is this. Number 1, we're going to get 3 cantrips. One of those cantrips needs to be able to do damage. And there's a lot of different choices here. And I mix it up. Sometimes I might take a Firebolt. Sometimes I might take Toll the Dead. Sometimes I might take Ray of Frost. It really just depends on my mood or how I see the character. But there's a lot of good options here. I pick one of them. The second thing I'm going to do, Minor Illusion, for sure. Minor Illusion is, in my opinion, one of the best cantrips in the game, maybe the best cantrip in the game. I've done a video on it, on how to use it effectively. I'm going to link that. So if you haven't watched that and you want to know how to use Minor Illusion effectively, I'm not going to bother summarizing it here. I do a much better job there. And then the third cantrip I'm going to pick is going to be Utility. And it might be one of several different cantrips. I like Prestidigitation for wizards. I like Message. I like Mending. I like Mage Hand. So there's a lot of different cantrips I might take, and I'll take one of them. Then I'm going to get 6 spells from my spellbook. Thing is I can't prepare 6 spells and I can't cast 6 spells. I'm going to be able to prepare my Intelligence plus Wizard level, which means probably 4 spells at this level. But I can't cast 4 spells. I'm only going to be able to cast 2 spells, and then when I take a short rest, 1 more. So probably 3 in a standard adventuring day. So there's just no point in me taking 6 different spells that are going to need preparation because I'm not going to be casting them anyway. So I'm going to take advantage of one of the unique principles of playing a wizard, and that is the way they use their ritual spells, because a wizard doesn't need to prepare their ritual spells to be able to cast them. So by taking a bunch of ritual spells, we put it so that we have 6 spells in our spellbook and we can cast all of them when we need them. And no other class can do this. So this is unique to wizards, and it's going to give you a lot more utility use than another caster will ever have. So what I'll usually do is I will take, number 1, a defensive spell. Now the 2 obvious choices for first level are either Mage Armor or Shield. Now Mage Armor is going to give you 8 hours of armor of +3 to your armor class. Well, a Shield will only give you 1 round of +5 to your armor class. But I still normally take Shield at first level. And the reason I'll take Shield over Mage Armor is because if we do our positioning right, often we're not attacked in combat. And what I generally think is I will probably need to cast Shield once. But sometimes I don't need to cast Shield at all. And if I don't, that's just such a huge difference for the rest of the day. That means there's an entire additional spell slot available for us. So at first level, I'll probably grab Shield. And I'll probably wait to Mage Armor to second level. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose what I call a Big Gun spell. And Big Gun spells are what I think of as those level 1 or level 2 spells that make a big difference in combat. And at first level, the one I almost always choose is Sleep, just because at first level, Sleep is astoundingly good. Its area of effect so can cover several different creatures, or it could be used against one creature because you're rolling a number of hit points and it's going to affect that many hit points of creatures. So there's a nice versatility there for attacking several different small creatures and one larger creature. Now, you don't want to be using it in a case where you don't know it's going to work. So if you have a big enemy and they might have more hit points than you roll, I'm going to hold off my Sleep until they're wounded and then cast it. But what I tend to find is that when I cast Sleep, that changes the combat from that point on. And then I'm going to take 4 rituals. The first ritual I'll always take is Find Familiar, obviously. The second one I usually take is Detect Magic, and then Comprehend Languages. Those 3 are pretty much always on my list. I find Detect Magic comes up all the time. I find Comprehend Languages comes up all the time. And then I'm going to choose one more ritual, and there's a lot of different ones I could choose from, and they're good, and I'll vary it up on from time to time. Sometimes I might take Tensor's Floating Disk. Sometimes I might take Alarm. It really just depends on the campaign and what I feel like at the time. Now I should say, although I take Sleep, if you like a blast spell, Thunderwave is actually a pretty good spell at first level too, because it is Area of Effect. It's not so good against single targets, but against large numbers of targets, it is pretty good. That 2d8 damage is nice. It's Thunder, which is seldom resisted, covers a bigger area than something like a Burning Hands spell. And it also has that knockback principle, which is occasionally useful. It's not always useful, but sometimes it is. So if you don't want to take Sleep, Thunderwave is another reasonably good option. I tend not to like the single target ones because sometimes those challenging combats are a lot of small creatures and taking out one of them is not such a big deal. So I like to have ones that can potentially affect several different creatures. So what do I do at first level? Well, outside of combat, of course, there's a certain type of skill that I'm going to be best at, those intelligence-based skills, like the knowledge is or like investigation. But then also I'm going to be using my rituals for a number of utility purposes. So maybe I'm casting Alarm on the campsite to keep it safe at night. Or maybe I'm the one comprehending languages because we just met a creature and it's trying to communicate with us and we don't understand. Or maybe I'm doing a Detect Magic after the combat to see if any of the things we found might be magical. And then remember, I'm using my Find Familiar, and I'm using it for scouting or spying. So there's lots of things that a wizard can do outside of combat at this level. Probably more than most other, maybe even any other class in the game. So what about in combat? Let's talk about combat. So at first level, when we get into combat, what I want to do is I want to evaluate the difficulty of the combat. Because if I am a fighter, for example, I draw my weapon and I attack every round. And I roll a d20 every round, and it hits or misses, and then I roll damage. And that's true whether the combat's tough or easy. But with a wizard, we need to be a little smarter than that. We are an intelligence-based character. We need to be an intelligence-based player. So what I'll do is I will evaluate a combat when we get into it. Are we facing 4 goblins, and we got the jump on them? Then I probably don't want to be spending any spells on this combat. But maybe an ogre attacked us, and it got an ambush on us. We're in big trouble. Now I want to think about my big gun spells. So we have very few first level spells we can cast a day. So when that combat begins, do I need to cast it now? That is the first thing I think about when the combat begins. And it's not just about how tough the creature is. Remember that ambush can really change things. If one side got the jump on the other side, that challenge just got a lot tougher for that ambush group. Also, there's other things that might impact the combat as well. Maybe one side has cover and the other side does not. One side's at extreme range and they have ranged attacks and the other side doesn't have very many. There's other things that can affect the difficulty of combat as well. And you need to evaluate that. So take a look at the map. Take a look at the enemies. What do you know about what's going on? Are we in trouble? If we're in trouble, get out your first level spell and prepare to attack. Because when you use it, it is going to have a significant impact on the difficulty of that combat. If you don't think this combat is likely to be a big challenge, then save that first level spell for the one that is. So what do we do if we're not casting that big spell? Well, the first thing I'm always going to do is there anything useful my familiar can be doing? Now, different tables have different reactions to familiars delivering the help action. At my table, it tends to be okay as long as I use it sparingly. But some tables might not be happy with it at all. Other tables will have no problem with you doing it every round. It's absolutely legal within the rules. There's no question about that. But there's a number of people who think it's just too good, right? It's too good for a first level spell to be able to do that on top of everything else Find Familiar can do. And I kind of agree. Find Familiar is just an astoundingly good spell. But legally, it can do that. And like I said, I will use it sparingly. So if we are in trouble, it starts to deliver the help action. Or if there's a big stake in a single attack, it'll deliver the help action. Most of the time, I don't have it do that. But that doesn't mean that I don't have my familiar do other things. They might be delivering healing potions to downed characters or good berries, depending on the campaign. They might be scouting for additional enemies, or they might be moving into a position where they are safe. So there's all kinds of things that my familiar might be doing in combat. I generally want to keep them in position so that if they need to deliver the help action, they can get in close enough. The second thing I think is there anything I can do effective with minor illusion? I mean, if I have a rogue beside me, maybe I want to give them some kind of obscurement. Then they can maybe hide behind it and attack from hidden. Or maybe just pop out behind it every round to fire and then hide behind it at the end of their round so that they can't be attacked unless the enemy takes disadvantage. Or maybe we want to do that for ourselves. That's number 2. Is there any effective way I can use minor illusion? If there is, then that's what I do. Once that minor illusion is used, then I can't do another minor illusion without giving up the first one. So often I'm only casting one. So what happens after that round? Well, then after that round, the obvious answer is to do an attack cantrip. But I don't always do an attack cantrip. It really depends. I've always said that cantrips do crappy damage, and they really do. I did that video on calculating your average damage per round, and if you do that, you'll see that a cantrip, like a firebolt, for example, is going to do about 3.6 points of damage on average around at level 1. That is well below the baseline damage, and it doesn't get better. It really doesn't. It only gets worse as you go up in level. So cantrips do crappy damage. That doesn't mean we never want to do them. If we have the choice of doing crappy damage or nothing, I'm going to choose the crappy damage because at least it's doing something. But often our choices aren't between doing crappy damage and doing nothing. Often our choices are do crappy damage or do a different kind of action that people forget about. Because remember, there's certain actions that all characters can take. Every character can deliver a help action. If I have that rogue beside me, maybe I want to give them the help action. That might give them sneak attack. It gives them advantage on their attack. Far more likely they're going to hit, so suddenly their average damage goes up quite a bit. Does it go up more than 3.6 per round? If it does, then I did more damage by delivering the help action than I did by using a cantrip. The other action that often gets forgotten about is the dodge action. If we are being targeted with attacks, we might have to use a shield spell. That's a huge resource cost for us. If we use the dodge action, all attacks against us would have disadvantage. It makes us not an attractive target in the first place, and those that do target us often won't require a shield spell for them to miss. Doing some crappy damage every round isn't worth risking that spell slot necessarily. So if we think we might be targeted, then the dodge action's a real option. Now if there's no good use of a help action and a dodge action is simply not required this round, then I do an attack cantrip. And you know what? That ends up being quite a few attack cantrips. Certainly at first level, I will be doing attack cantrips a fair amount. But I will go through that entire list before I get, and the attack cantrip is kind of the last resort. So how effective are we in combat at first level? Well, it depends. If we use our big gun, we are extremely effective, potentially more effective than any other party member. If we don't use it, then we're probably less effective than other party members. And I like that. It means when it's important, we're really powerful. And when it's not important, we're not. And it is a tactical decision, and it's based on us being smart. So that's why I like low-level wizard play. I find it interesting to pick those points where I'm going to be super effective, and those points where I'm going to sit back and let the rest of the party do the heavy lifting. So what changes at second level? Not a lot. We get one additional spell per day. We don't even get additional spells on an arcane recovery. So we've gone from 2 spells on our list to 3, and then 1 more on a short rest. So 4 spells for the entire day. So how am I going to use that extra spell? Well, I'm going to take the mage armor spell at this point, and I'm going to cast it. And then that uses up that extra spell. And now I'm looking at a higher base defense. I'm still going to prepare shield at this point so that I can do the mage armor with a shield on top, which gives me actually quite a good armor class when I need it. Otherwise, my tactics don't really change at all. So let's move on to third level. Third level, things change significantly. The first thing is our spell slots outright double because we've gone from 3 spell slots to 6. The other thing to note is we now have second level spells and we can cast 2 of them per day. So when we're looking at spell selection, this is the time to look at those second level spells. And what I'll do at this point is when I look at second level spells, the first thing I'm thinking about is give me a big gun. Give me either an area of effect spell that's going to have a big effect on combat or a single target spell that's going to have a reasonable effect on that target. And then there tend to be two spells I tend to choose between. The first one is Web. Web is a huge battlefield control spell at this level. It can restrain your enemies, and that means they will have disadvantage on their attacks, and your allies will have advantage on their attacks against them. So very useful spell. It will use your concentration, but we're not concentrating on anything else at this point, so that's not a problem. The second one I'll often take is Flaming Sphere. Now, Flaming Sphere is just a straight out damage spell, and that tends not to be my focus in the long term. But at this level, I like a Flaming Sphere because it's doing pretty reliable damage. It does about 5 points of damage a round with my bonus action. And then, say I throw it on top of a cantrip, now we're doing about 9 points of damage a round, which at level 3 is not bad damage. The other thing is we can then have enemies take additional damage if they happen to end their turn next to the sphere. Now, I tend not to count on that, but in certain environments, it really kind of depends on the map. If an enemy can move away from the flaming sphere at the end of their turn, of course they're going to do so. But sometimes they kind of get trapped next to it. Because sometimes they just get trapped. Maybe they're in a hallway and the flaming sphere is behind them, and then behind that there's other enemies. And on the other side, there's your ally, the fighter. So there's nowhere for them to go. So they're taking that additional damage every round. So now we're doing an additional 5 points of damage every round. So we've gone from doing, say, 9 points of damage every round to 14 points of damage every round, which is good damage for this level. Now, one I tend not to take, but a lot of people talk about, is taking Dragon's Breath and then casting it on your familiar. Because Dragon's Breath does 3d6 damage every round to an area, so you can potentially affect more than one creature. That's not bad at all, but it uses your action every round. But that's okay if you're a familiar. And because it doesn't use an attack roll, the familiar can do it on their round. They don't follow that restriction where they can't do attacks because it's not really an attack, it's an area of effect. So the idea is you get something like your owl familiar, and then you cast Dragon's Breath on them, and then they go over their enemy. They'll do a flyby attack, do this area of effect, and then fly away, so that they don't make themselves a target every round. Now, one problem I have with this is, although in certain environments I could see that working perfectly, there's a few cases where I could see it not working well at all. If we're in an enclosed space, that owl's got nowhere to go. And secondly, if those enemies have ranged attacks, they might not care that your owl moved away, and you've turned your owl into a primary target because it's doing lots of damage every round to an area. So if they had ranged attacks, it makes perfect sense for them to kill your owl, and that's so easy for them to do. So I'm not a huge fan of that one. I can find how it could be useful in certain situations. Also, I think there are certain tables that might have issues with that kind of play as well. Again, know your table. Now with my other spell selection at 3rd level, now I start to think about, okay, so I'm going to be concentrating on a spell now. Maybe a Flaming Sphere, maybe a web spell, but I'm going to be concentrating on a spell. Do I want some more options, some powerful options for when I'm concentrating on that spell? So that's when I look at spells like Grease, because Grease is a non-concentration spell that can have a significant impact on a combat by making enemies fall prone. And of course, if they fall prone, then our allies would get advantage on attacks against them. Never mind, it's going to slow their movement. And we're going to get another cantrip at 4th level. So what cantrip am I going to take at 4th level? Well, I've had 3 levels of gameplay already. Did I notice a gap? If I noticed cases where, man, I wish I had Mage Hand, man, I wish I had Mage Hand, then at 4th level, I'm going to take Mage Hand. If none of those cases really spoke to me, then I'm going to take another attack cantrip, just to provide some versatility. And what attack cantrip I take will depend on what the first cantrip was. I will generally choose, when I get my second attack cantrip, I'm going to have one that's going to require an attack roll, and one that requires a saving throw. So if I had Toll the Dead, I'm not going to take Acid Splash. But if I took Firebolt at 1st level, then I might look at something like a Toll the Dead, or something like an Acid Splash, or something like a Poison Spray. The other thing I'm going to look at is the type of damage, because I want those to be different as well. Because what if the creature is immune to a certain kind of damage? Let's say I took Toll the Dead and I come across a creature that's immune to necrotic damage. Then I want to have some other form of damage I can do. So something like a Firebolt makes sense, something like a Ray of Frost makes sense, but something like a Chill Touch does not. And again, I'm going to be evaluating combats, but now I'm evaluating it a little differently. Are these combats really easy? Then I'm going to be using cantrips alone. Are these battles reasonably powerful? then I might use a first level spell. And if the combat is very challenging, that's when I'm going to use my second level spell. So I'm just going to have one additional level of evaluation. And that's how I play a third level wizard. Now, at fourth level, first off, I'm probably picking up something like the Warcaster feat. So concentration just got a bit easier for me. And I'm going to pick another combat spell for second level. So maybe if I had Flaming Sphere, now I pick up Web. Maybe if I have Web, now I might pick up Flaming Sphere. Or I might pick up a different combat spell, like a Levitate spell. And then I'm going to pick up a maneuverability option. Usually that's going to be a Misty Step spell. But sometimes it might be a first level spell. It might be an Expeditious Retreat. Might be a Longstrider spell. There are a number of different ways that a wizard can improve their maneuverability. I'm going to pick one of them, and I'm going to prepare it. And now I need to start thinking about preparations. We're at that level now where we don't have an infinite number of preparations. No longer do the number of preparations outweigh the number of good spells we have. So we're going to have to start excluding spells. Generally, at fourth level, I would expect to have 7 preparations. It's equal to your intelligence modifier plus your level. So if my intelligence modifier was 3 and my level was 4, that's 7 preparations. So what am I going to prepare? Well, I'm going to prepare at least one big gun second level spell like Web, and I'm probably going to prepare a second one. Then I'm going to prepare a maneuverability spell, probably Misty Step, maybe something else. Then I'm going to have Mage Armor prepared. I'm going to have Shield prepared. I'm going to have Absorb Elements prepared. And then I'm going to have another first level combat spell, something like a Grease prepared. And that's it. I'm done. That's 7 spells. I probably have additional good spells I would love to add in. The other thing is, I now probably have multiple spells that require concentration. I probably have multiple things that might use up my bonus action. So now I need to plan in the combat. First, I evaluate the combat. How many resources do I want to use on this combat? If it's an all-out thing, then I really need to think about these things. What spell do I plan to concentrate on? What am I going to be doing with my action each round? What am I going to be doing with my bonus action each round? And what do I need to have my reactions for? So I might be using my Flaming Sphere to be concentrating on, and then my bonus action will be attacking with that Flaming Sphere. And maybe my action will be used on my general choice of cantrips versus dodge or help actions. And then finally saving my reaction for a shield if it's needed. So then that answers all the questions. So now I go into the combat and I don't have any conflicts. No one has to tell me, hey, does your Flaming Sphere still work if you cast that Web spell? No, it doesn't, because you didn't plan it out. What am I going to be concentrating on? It's Web or it's Flaming Sphere. It's not both. Now, positioning, I do no different than I did at first level. Center towards the back of the combat. If things are getting dicey in the combat, there's nothing wrong with backing off further. A lot of our things have pretty good range on them, so we can do things at further ranges than a lot of other party members can. So make use of that. That makes you less of a target, if possible. Sometimes you're in an enclosed space and you just can't. Sometimes moving back too far might put you in harm's way from other enemies. So there's certain times where that's not such a great tactic, but when it is available, I use it. Otherwise, I try to just kind of stay in the middle of things. Keep other party members around you. I'd rather have the rogue be facing off somebody in melee than me. And don't forget you have a familiar. Your familiar can be doing things for you. Maybe they're looking for other enemies. Maybe they're delivering healing potions or good berries. Maybe they're delivering the help action. There's no reason why you can't have your familiar be just another free action for you in combat. So do you have any questions about tactics for low-level wizards? If you do, put them in the comment section down below, or you can message me on Twitter or my WordPress account, which I will be putting in the video description down below. So otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back and relax, and I'm going to have some fun, because D&D is for everyone. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.